The clip we are about to watch is an amazing clip from Dr. R.C. Sproul, where he presents a philosophical argument based on the ideas of Augustine and Descartes regarding self-consciousness and existence as it relates to some claims of atheism as a worldview. I will give my thoughts in the back end of the video, so make sure you stick to the end. So let's dive in.
Well, Augustine, like Calvin did later, said that with the idea of self-consciousness that we have in our own minds, an idea that cannot be disputed, an idea that cannot be destroyed, that we understand not only with certainty that we exist through self-consciousness, but with that awareness of the self is immediately presented to our consciousness that we are aware of ourselves as being finite. That the idea of finitude is pressed together and locked in with every human self-conscious experience. I think, therefore I am, but I know that I am finite. I know that I can remember back to 1945 and even earlier than that. But if I ask myself, what were you doing? What were you thinking in April of 1937? I know with certainty the answer to that question. What I was thinking in April of 1937, ladies and gentlemen, was nothing. And what I was doing in 1937 in April was nothing. Because I was nothing. I did not exist. I didn't have a body. I didn't have a mind. Somebody might want to argue that I existed in the mind of God and his ideas, and that's another argument, another story. But as far as my self-conscious existence, I had none. I don't believe in Bridie Murphy or Shirley MacLaine, that I had a previous existence, because if I did, I have utterly no awareness of it. And if I have no memory of it, there's no difference between having had a previous life and not having had a previous life, because there's no connection between the two whatsoever. I can relate to the boy standing on the streets of Chicago in 1945. I cannot relate to the nothingness of 1937. I did not exist. And so, knowing that I am finite, I know that I am not God. So far, all I've become sure of are two things: that I exist and that I am not God. So how do we get from there to God? Well, Augustine followed the pattern and the steps in this manner. He was thinking that if he exists, then there's only three possible explanations for his existence. And this is exactly the same place that Descartes was going in the 17th century. He said, if I exist, then either I am eternal, I am self-created, or I am ultimately created by something or someone who is eternal. See those three options? Either I am eternal, I am self-created, or I am created by something or someone who is eternal. Now, Augustine said those are the only three alternatives, and I've been using that for 40 years in all kinds of venues of apologetics, and I challenge people to come up with some fourth category. And there are all kinds of attempts to do that, but again, the rose of any other name is not a rose. People say, well, I don't believe in self-creation, I just believe in spontaneous generation. But I said, wait a minute, spontaneous generation is self-creation. And show that to their satisfaction. Or they'll say, well, I don't believe in those three. I believe that we're here as the result of the infinite series of finite causes. This was the argument that Bertrand Russell used in his public debate with Frederick Copplestone. And Frederick Copplestone said to Russell, he said, that idea of an infinite series of finite causes is unthinkable. It's unintelligible. It's irrational. And Bertrand Russell said, well, I can conceive of it. Well, what do you say to somebody like that? Well, what Copplestone said is it's one thing to say that you can conceive of it. It's another thing to be able to conceive of it. I hear people say to me that they can conceive of square circles, but they're deluded. You know? They can't articulate it in any intelligible way because a square circle is a contradiction in terms, and an infinite series of finite causes is the problem of self-creation expanded infinitely. That's an intellectual problem on steroids. I don't want to knock steroids. They've been keeping me alive the last couple of weeks. I don't have any problem admitting it. My name's not Barry Bonds. I took a steroid this morning before I came here, so I could do this. All right. So Augustine reduced everything to these three possibilities. Notice that two out of the three. Steve, can you jump up here and grab those glasses? This is my caddy. Aren't you going to clean them? Yes. All right. Thank you. So you have these three possibilities that, and two of the three involve something eternal. The one that does not is the idea of self-creation. And of the three options, two things I want to say about self-creation. That is the one that probably 99% of atheists appeal to discount the existence of God. Scratch an atheist and you will find an advocate of self-creation of some sort. And the idea of self-creation is, of these three options, the easiest one to dismiss, and the one that has to be dismissed because it is analytically false. That is, it's false by definition. It's false because it falls of its own weight. And I've said this many times, and you can think it through. You don't have to be a philosopher to get it. For something to be self-created, it has to be before it is. For something to create itself, it has to be there in order to do the job. And so it's existing before it's existing. It's being and not being at the same time in the same relationship. It is and it is not at the same time in the same relationship, which is a manifest violation of the law of non-contradiction. It's sheer irrationality. It's foolishness. It's really laughable and ridiculous, and yet people with all kinds of academic degrees and otherwise perfectly noteworthy achievements use this kind of thinking all the time. I tell the story about this Nobel Prize winner out in the West Coast who said that we can no longer believe in the doctrine of spontaneous generation. We know now that something does not come from nothing. Ex nihilo nihil fit. If there's nothing, you can't get anything out of it. You can plead, you can coax, you can beg, but you can't make it happen. Because out of nothing, nothing comes. He said we can't believe in spontaneous generation anymore. We have to believe in gradual spontaneous generation. Stop me if I'm lying. I mean, this is serious stuff. It is gradual spontaneous. You can't get something out of nothing quickly. You have to be very patient. And if you wait for it, it will come. Yeah. Now, this was a watershed statement by this Nobel Prize-winning physicist because at the heart of the Enlightenment, at the heart of the disintegration of the classical synthesis was the Enlightenment declaration of the Aufklärung. The enlightening principle was this, that we no longer need the God hypothesis to explain the origin of the universe or of human beings, because now we know that the universe came into being through spontaneous generation, self-creation, something out of nothing, the rabbit out of the hat. without a hat, without the rabbit, and without the magician. No sufficient cause, no efficient cause, no cause whatsoever. Nothing. And so that option of self-creation can be eliminated right off the bat. It's nonsense. Funny, I had a dream just the other night that I had a formal debate with Richard Dawkins about this stuff. This did not happen. This is a dream. This is just a fantasy. And in the dream, he was pleading for some kind of self-creation, and I went through this dialogue with him, and I said, please tell me how something can create itself out of nothing. And he paused for a moment, and he looked at me, and he said, well, it just does. Now, don't go out of here and say that Richard Dawkins ever said such a thing. I dreamt that he said such a thing. He's not guilty of this at all. He probably would be if we had this conversation. But he said, it just does. I said, it just does? He said, yeah, I said, Mr. Dawkins, do you realize how pathetic that argument is for self-creation? It just does. And he looked at me and says, why is it pathetic? And I said, it just is. And I turned to the moderator and I said, sir, the defense rests. And I said, really? The debate's over. I don't have anything more to say. And neither does Mr. Dawkins. It just is. You know. That's where we are. Well, Augustine understood the impossibility, not improbability, the rational impossibility of self-creation. And I've said it a zillion times. If there ever was a time that there was nothing, the only possible thing that could be here now is nothing. But this is why it's so important for Augustine's starting point to establish self-consciousness. This is why it was so important for Descartes' cogito. To prove categorically, absolutely, mathematically, that something is. Because if something does exist, then that means automatically something has always existed. Now it's just a question of discovering what or who it is who has always existed. Always existed. Somebody whose existence is not contingent, not dependent, not derived, not finite, but is independent, non-derived, self-existent, and eternal. And that idea forces itself upon us, not in our fingers, not in our eyes, not in our ears, but in our mind. Because in our mind is where we encounter formal philosophical certainty.
This is the whole idea which I believe was firmly supported by Descartes' idea of cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am, which similarly establishes the certainty of one's own existence through the act of thinking. I believe one way to check the validity of our worldview is to check if it squares with reality, because we all claim to know things, and there should be a basis for our dependence on our five senses to perceive reality. And if we honestly believe our minds to have developed through random processes over 1 billion years ago, then to be consistent. We simply can't trust our senses to tell us any truth because we have no reason to trust them. But that's not how we live our lives. So I want you to humbly do this, especially if you don't know where you are in your faith journey with God, and simply say in your prayer that, God, if you exist, please show me a sign. And if you're genuinely seeking for that, God will make a way, and the truth is, God knows you better than you know yourself. So let that be a humble request, and I believe he will answer in his own way to you. Just as Carl Jung said, that which we need the most will be found where we least want to look. With that being said, thank you for watching this video. I will see you next time.